Thank you very much, Anna, and welcome this morning. Hola, bienvenue, willkommen, maybe a few other languages, which represent the notion that Federico Vigil, who is here today, incorporated as an artist in Mundos de Mestizaje, which is a wonderful fresco which introduces us to all the influences from around the world that affect us today in New Mexico. Here I am showing you just the fresco as it exists above the door when you enter. Federico Vigil, who is a native New Mexican and his family has been here for 400 years, I think. He's here. Labored for 10 years on this fresco. And it is not only physically and artistically demanding to make a fresco, but also in terms of extensive research. I began to understand over the past few years how Federico worked and how much effort he put into actually designing the fresco. Here we are. So Federico was interested in showing all of these influences that affect us in today's New Mexican sphere, as well as in the Americas. And he works, He works rather in the manner of a scholar by reading books and consulting with many scholars, and I was fortunate to be one of them, working a little bit on helping him with the fresco, which he is now making in the convention center, which involves wine and the history of agriculture and wine in the New World and the Old World. But what he did was find out what we have affecting us here and putting it all into this concave space. I believe it's 4,000 square feet. It's a remarkable feat. It's just extraordinary, especially when you think about how a fresco is made. And while I won't go into all of the details of the 5 layers of wet plaster that have to be applied and the physical difficulty of doing this, and you can just think about Michelangelo on the ceiling, that was Federico at the top here on a forklift or whatever, scissor lift, I think it's called, creating this. It was an extraordinary physical effort, and Federico moved here to Barelas in order to complete this fresco over the course of 10 years. And this fresco has everything, as they used to say on Saturday Night Live. It has a mix of traditions, different cultures, and is so carefully researched that he has manuscripts that are fairly obscure that are included, and all sorts of references to what created the cultures and the civilizations that exist here today. Now, this is the cartoon of the fresco. And frescoes are wet. Oh, go back. Sorry. If you go out in the hall today, you can actually experiment with making a fresco. So I won't go into the detail of it, but in order to actually create it, you can't paint directly on the wall. You have to work out the design beforehand, which Federico did over the course of, I think it was 2.5 years, correct? And he had a panel who had to approve what was in it as well, which adds another layer of complexity. And then you have to draw it on the paper, the cartoon paper, and you have to punch the outlines into the plaster. Then you have to paint into wet plaster, and you have to do it quickly. You can only paint one day's wet plaster at a time. And if you make a mistake, you have to scrape it off and start all over again. So this is a very unforgiving and physically laborious medium, which involves enormous preparation. Now, if you have just gone into the Torreon, you know that it has these slit windows, and it's a tower shape reminiscent of, well, many tower shapes that we see in different cultures. But the the slits of the windows actually line up with cardinal directions. And that is very much Mesoamerican. And Mesoamerican is the term we use for the cultures south of the border, essentially, down to Central America. And there are many, and I will be discussing this. So the cardinal directions and the division of the Torreon into 4 parts help us to understand what's going on in the Torreon, because each culture is treated, well, I think there's some movement around it as well. Now, the ancient American cultures that are represented in the Torreon and that I'm going to talk about today are represented here on this slide by the Olmec, whom you probably all know, famous for their colossal heads, by the Teotihuacanos, who are north of the city of Mexico, and by the Maya on the bottom left. I don't know if you can see. That is a temple at Palenque, a Maya site in Yucatan, and by the Aztec, of course, with their most famous calendar stone depicted there. So this is just to give you a sense of what is shown in the fresco. And this is very reductive because, of course, in Mesoamerica there were many, many cultures, but in terms of monumental architecture and art, these are the ones that we find most memorable. Okay, there's a nice map of Mesoamerica. And for those of you, let's see, who need some guidance here, here is Mexico City, okay? And Teotihuacan is just north of Mexico City. How many people have been there? Oh, yeah, quite a few. Okay, so you know it. And Mexico City itself is the capital of the Aztecs, named Tenochtitlan. We'll talk about that shortly. The Olmec came from this area on the Gulf Coast, and the Maya are all in green over here. So they were further south. And we won't be talking about Oaxaca and so forth. So go ahead. Now, this is just above the doorway that you entered, right here. And Federico put in this space a lot of references to Mesoamerican cultures, including the very beginning and the basis of Mesoamerican civilization itself and civilization in the Americas. And that is, of course, corn, the agriculture based on corn. And the corn here is growing out of the stela and beautifully depicted with some Maya signs, the Olmec head, references to books of the Maya, and so forth. So this is the most important crop upon which all these cultures depended. And it's a huge accomplishment to have domesticated corn. And people underestimate how important that was because what people started with probably 10,000, 9,000 years ago was this. This is a very unprepossessing looking piece of grass called teosinte. And about 9,000 years ago, someone thought to breed it selectively so that ultimately we got this, which was edible, and there were biological changes. Now, corn in Mexico, as you know, is multicolored, and here too, not on the East Coast, for those of you. It's only yellow. And corn not only was the basis of the diet, but it was a basis for the religion. The most important god in Mesoamerica and in the Maya was the corn god, and this is the Maya corn god from Copan. And he is a handsome young man with corn silk for hair. And another interesting aspect of corn is it forms a metaphor for life. So we have in this Maya fresco from Cacaxtla a depiction of a cornstalk, and instead of corn cobs, we have human heads. And so humans and their heads could be seen as corn-like, and sometimes heads were actually, skulls were shaped to look like corn, and beheading itself could be seen as plucking off the corn cob. Sorry about that, Federico. Okay, next. Now, let's talk about the Olmec, which is usually referred to as the cultura madre. Now we know that it may not be the earliest culture, but in our minds it's still one of those important ones because of these colossal heads which we see. This colossal head is wearing a leather helmet, and these heads weigh 8 to 10 tons and can be 10 to 12 feet high. There were 17 of them found. In front of it is an Olmec figure, a very small one, a greenstone, and I'll talk about them in a moment. These balls that you see in front, Federico is referring to two things with them, and we'll be talking about them. He's talking about, or showing, the rubber balls that exist in the Mesoamerican ball game. And this is a very important ball game that was a sacred ritual that existed in many forms all over the Americas. And in fact, you can go to Arizona and see a ball cart at Casa Grande if you're interested. So it extended up here into the Southwest. And the balls themselves are more than rubber balls. They also represent the 5 suns of the Aztec eras, and we'll talk about that shortly too. Now, these rubber balls were made by the Olmec. Probably they were the ones who discovered what you can do with rubber, and that is because they had rubber plants on the Gulf Coast, and they added morning glory vine juice to the balls, to the rubber, in order to create something that was bouncy. So you can see the whole genesis of football and soccer as starting in the Gulf Coast of Mexico. And this is the actual head which Federico was looking at when he made the head that exists on the fresco. And you can see this is very typical Olmec features: almond eyes, fleshy, downturned lips, and this flange here on the leather helmet. But all of them are different. Here's another one, which has talons on it. So there were animals that were constantly referenced in terms of warrior aspects of rulers. Now, we think that these Olmec heads probably represented rulers or leaders in the Olmec cities. And we have them from San Lorenzo and La Venta, and they do look similar, but they all are identifiably different people. So they appear to be almost portraits. We can't say for sure, of course, but they were buried and were part of a ritual enclosure, which we'll see in a moment. And I just wanted to reference the greenstone figures which exist here in a little arrangements, much smaller, and Federico has painted one from behind. This is a ritual happening now with all these greenstone figures and one of granite. We don't know what's going on precisely, but this was buried in a cache at La Venta and then discovered later. The celts themselves, we call those tall things, could represent corn or something else. We don't know precisely. It has been suggested that all these people are facing someone who might be about to be sacrificed, but there is no evidence for that precisely. So at this point, it's all theoretical. Okay, so this is just a great shot of the discovery of the Olmec head at San Lorenzo. And you can see how it's rather muddy. And, you know, they hit it with a shovel, and it was a little more than they expected, actually. So what's remarkable is that the stone that was used didn't actually come from the sites where they were found. The stone itself was shipped 50 miles downstream on the river on rafts. So this shows an extraordinary amount of, labor and organization on the part of cultures operating from about 1200 to 800 BC when we're talking about the heads. Now, Olmec heads are and have entered the popular culture in an enormous way, and this is just our favorite baby head, as I like to call it, from Boston. This is in front of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And I would take my students there, and they found that particularly creepy. But that is a contemporary artist who is working in the same medium, essentially. And here's yet another colossal head, as found at La Venta and seen in an archival photograph. Okay, and then just how many of you can recognize this Olmec head, which is precisely the one that Federico has painted. It's right here in Albuquerque. Yeah, it's in Nob Hill. I think it's it's a folk art shop. Anyway, so I shot that out. And then, of course, in Archaeology magazine, we like to have cartoons involving the Olmec. He's good with crops, but slow to respond in an emergency. Okay, and this is the site of La Venta, where these Olmec heads, some of them were unearthed. And this site dates to probably, 800, 700 BC. And this is the area where they were found. This is actually one of the first pyramids we have that still exists in Mesoamerica. And it looks like a fluted cupcake. That's how it's been described. But it actually was a formal pyramid when it was first built. We now know. Now, this site is now basically an oil platform, so not very visitable, but most of the material has been moved to Tabasco, and you can see it in the Parque La Venta if you prefer to do that. Now, next to the Olmec head, to the left of it, above the door, is a stela, which is a stone slab, essentially, that has been carved, and this is Stela 19 from the same site that was discovered there. And this is interesting because the Olmec went from three-dimensional sculpture of a colossal sort to showing a lot more information. If you think about how you can depict information, particularly in a culture where people aren't totally literate or don't have writing yet, you can show a lot more symbols in a two-dimensional slab like this than you can in a head where you're depicting really one thing or one man. And what do we have here? And the reason that Federico chose it is because this is a very important stela that shows the very first feathered serpent, as we call it, in Mesoamerica. And this rather nasty looking serpent with its mouth open is most definitely a rattlesnake. You see the rattles at the end, and he's enveloping an important man who wears a mask. And is that a bird mask? It looks somewhat parrot-like to me, but some people have called it snake-like, and he holds a container of some sort and makes a gesture with his hands. We don't know precisely what is happening here, but the importance of animal symbols is something that we see in the fresco and all through Mesoamerica. Animals are more important in some respects and in their ability to convey ideas than people in much of this. So here is the fresco, here's the actual stela. So you see what it looks like. He actually looks even nastier in real life. Thank you, Federico, for making him better. But this is an extraordinarily skillfully carved stela, and if you think of the early dates and what is happening, they have a fully formed ritual system and religion which is based on some scary things and which is related in some respects to corn and other animals. Now, going back to the Mesoamerican ball game, here you see the balls, and this one is yellow. I cut it off, but that represents one of the suns, and they're bouncing across the surface. This is a goal, so you sent the ball through. Here is a ball player. Let's talk about that for a moment. I believe I have the, oops. Here, okay. So the Mesoamerican ball game, which was this ritual which spread over all this area, was played in courts like this, formally and ritually, but also just generally by people on dirt, where, of course, you can't tell. It was played by lords and rulers, and we see deities, rulers playing here, and these are Maya representations. This is from Monte Alban, so this is Oaxaca. You can see it's all over, and every archaeological site in Mesoamerica from this era, these date to the first millennium AD, would have its own ball court, and sometimes many. Some of them ritual, some of them representing the cosmos, and some of them less exalted. Now the balls themselves are here. This is probably an exaggeration of the actual size, because you would get killed if you were hit by a ball that size. These were very heavy rubber balls, and there you see how they use their hips. So it was played in some versions with the hips, and in some versions probably with your shoulders. We don't know the precise rules, and probably they changed over 2,000 to 3,000 years, so we can't say for sure. But we do know this: it was a very difficult game. And it survives here in a sense when you think about our mania for soccer and football in precisely the area that we live in and in the southern part of the US. But here it was so important that it was actually played as a means of conflict resolution. So you could resolve conflict and not have a war by playing a game between two rulers of two cities. And that's a really extraordinary thing, to have ritual warfare of that sort. So, now below the Olmec head, here's the very nicely depicted ball. We have some symbols of Mesoamerica, the writing, and one of the signal accomplishments in Mesoamerica was the development of writing and a script, and that is most developed and most well known amongst the Maya, who have a hieroglyphic system which is not only extraordinarily complicated but very beautiful as well. And this is a Maya sky band at the bottom here, right above the door, and above it we have more or less Aztec glyph. And here Federico has represented a toy, I believe it's a dog, and it has wheels. And why do you think it's there? It's there because the Mesoamericans discovered the wheel. They knew the wheel. And people ask, why didn't they use it? It's because of the terrain. It wasn't really very useful in a rainforest or other sorts of places. So the wheel was known, but mostly used in toys. And other signal accomplishments of the Mesoamericans, besides the corn, the wheel, rubber, and script, was a system of religion in the cosmos which was extremely organized and laudable. And this, I might add, is the divine feminine. This is Federico's own imagination here, which is a wonderful touch to imagine that, and the Aztecs did have the feminine divine, but this is perhaps more beautifully stated and less scary than what we have in the Aztec world. Okay, here is the Aztec coronation stone of Moctezuma, Montezuma, you know him as the second, or Moctezuma, depending. And here we have the glyph which was used. This shows the date of the coronation, and here it is becoming something winged and divine in Federico's approach. And below we have this Maya these Maya glyphs. You can see here, this is a drawing taken from the sarcophagus of the ruler Pakal in Palenque, and it forms the border of the sarcophagus, and we have signs that have to do with the sky and with celestial bodies, clouds, sun, and so forth. So that's very appropriate for over the door. I think you chose wisely. And here, a little higher up, one of the signal accomplishments was the development of the concept of zero, or null, as we call it. And these football-like shapes are Maya glyphs for zero. And if we go back in time and look at Maya books, they're called codices, or the codex here, they actually had calculations of astronomy and mathematics that were more accurate than what Europeans had at the same time. This zero, as you see, enabled them to do astronomical calculations that you couldn't do with Roman numerals. And the Dresden Codex, we have very few books left from the Maya, but they had very many. Unfortunately, they were burnt by the friars, most of them, and we just have a few that are pre-contact, pre-conquest, and this is one of the most beautiful. Some of them are about divination and about calendrics, about the calendar, and about the gods. Okay, so if we go down, here's the Maya sky-band. We go to the right, we see the ball player in all his garb, and he's wearing a leather helmet, right? And we have in the middle a Maya temple, a pyramid. And that is the pyramid of Chichen Itza, the Castillo. Sorry, I'm getting a little... Go ahead. And how many of you have been here? Probably many. This is now one of the major sites. So this Castillo, and Federico took some liberties with the top, which is round and belongs to another building at Chichen. But the Castillo is a very ancient form of Maya pyramid. It's called a radial pyramid. It's equal on all its sides, and it has 9 levels representing the underworld. And I think most of you have seen some photos of people, 10,000 people come to see the snake shadow that winds its way down the side. But this is really an extraordinary calendrical monument because we have 365 steps, we have 9 levels. It represents the cosmos. And I think this is why Federico chose to represent it, because not only is it one of the most identifiable temples in the Maya world, but it's a real masterpiece of building and conceptual thought as well. And then to the right, or below the Castillo itself, Chichen Itza, we have an individual statue called a chacmul, and that's just a made-up name by a scholar. But this is a man who lies, well, more or less not quite on his back, but he holds a platter here, and he receives offerings. Okay, and this individual, or this figure, exists in many, many contexts, from the Maya times all the way to the Aztec and earlier. And here is one which is also in Chichen Itza, and this one here has that very impervious expression. Despite what's behind him, you can see these are upside-down serpents with their maws open and large teeth, and with their tails, with their rattles, in the air. So as Maya culture proceeded, the imagery got a little scarier and perhaps more warlike as conflict seemed to occur in the Yucatan Peninsula, and some of that may have had to do with increasing population. We can learn lessons from the Maya, certainly. Let's go. Okay, so moving to the right of the fresco, away from Chichen Itza, I'm going to go back in time a little bit to Teotihuacan and the site of Teotihuacan. And Federico has depicted Teotihuacan here just with a part of one of the temples and with the feathered serpent head, which is really extraordinarily painted and quite vivid. And this head comes from this site that obviously many of you have been to, but here's a very nice aerial view of Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan is 1 hour north of Mexico City, and it is an extraordinary accomplishment dating somewhere between 0 to 600 or 650 AD, and the main parts, the main pyramids, were probably built by about 250 AD. And what it's famous for, besides these massive pyramids, is the Street of the Dead. And this Calle de los Muertes it was given this name and worshipped at by the Aztecs. So the Aztec emperors would come here after it was abandoned to worship the gods who created the universe here at Teotihuacan. And it's nestled in a valley with volcanoes around it. Here's another view. And if you go down the street, rather you should probably start at the bottom, go up the street, but if we go down the street, we get to the temple where this feathered serpent was taken. Okay, so but first I want to show you the Pyramid of the Sun, probably 225, and I don't know if many of you have climbed this. I don't think it's allowed anymore, but the reason I am in this field is because I was taken here by my parents when I was 6 years old. I saw the excavations, and I knew immediately that that's what I would do with my life. And they were excavating here, and we could see everything. And much more has been discovered since that time. They've tunneled into the pyramids and found caches and sacrifices and so forth. So a lot is happening in this site. This is the Pyramid of the Moon, which is at the top of the Street of the Dead. It echoes the volcano behind it. And all of this is on an axis that reflects the cosmos. And this is a grid city, which in the first centuries after Christ was born, actually had a population that may have been one of the largest in the world, which is really extraordinary if you think about it. And this reflects the volcano and some sightings of stars and so forth. It's really extraordinary. But if we go all the way to the bottom, or more properly, start at the bottom, because you go up towards the Pyramid of the Moon, we reach a pyramid called the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. And this is the only decorated on the facade pyramid at Teotihuacan. And you can see these heads emerging here. Now, sometime after 225 or so, this was covered over, which we believe might have been some sort of unrest happening in Teotihuacan, and it was burnt later on in the 550s or 600s, so we know the population left the area. But this shows us that something was happening in this area. Here is a head from the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, and you can see a theme in Federico's fresco of the feathered serpent going through time. Here's a very nice live serpent. And here is the facade a little closer, and we have the feathered serpent along the stairway. And then here, this very interesting facade, which we don't really know what's happening, but we think it's the story of creation as the Teotihuacanos saw it. We have a snake here, a sort of crocodilian mask here, and a head here of the serpent itself. And there's shells and marine themes. So it would seem that they saw creation as happening in a watery deep, and shells and feathers and things like that were quite valuable to them and to people up into Aztec times. They were traded. So let's go a little closer. And all of this was painted. So these were painted bright colors, including red and so forth. So Federico has imagined the snake itself, the serpent, in these bright colors. He is wearing a wreath of serpents, a wreath of feathers around his head. Let's see. Yeah, there you can see the wreath. They almost look like petals, but they're feathers. So it's like a corona. He's almost like a sun emerging from, in some cases, the stairway, and in some cases, the actual facade of the temple. And this temple had 225 sacrificed people found inside later. When I went to graduate school, they said Teotihuacan was a peaceful experiment, but we found afterwards that it wasn't so peaceful. But one of the choices that Federico made in creating the fresco was to focus on the accomplishments and the positive, peaceful imagery that we find in Mesoamerica, rather than the gory and somewhat, how shall we say, TMZ-like aspects. Okay, so if we go down from the feathered serpent, we have something entirely different because we're moving into contact, the time when Hernan Cortes came to these shores and created the clash of civilizations, some people call it. But if we go to the Iberian Peninsula, some of the earliest art is here, and he's depicted it closely, again, an animal, in this case a bison, the Torreon bison down there, and this coming from Altamira, which is one of the most extraordinary cave painting sites in Spain. And we know that the cave itself could date to 35,000 BC. This probably dates to about 14,000 or so. But the extraordinary delicacy and skill which early artists in cave paintings in Europe show is just amazing. And we see that, so often other cultures are derided, or early cultures are derided for lack of skill or primitivism. And actually, when I entered my department, it was called Department of Primitive Art. We don't use that anymore. There's nothing primitive about these things. These are some of the most sophisticated naturalistic paintings that exist in the history of art. Let's go ahead. Going down from the bison, and he's looking right at it, is another detail that I thought I'd point out. This is an Aztec Mixtec mask, also involving a snake around the eyes. And this is made of turquoise. And this is maybe where we come in here, where turquoise, parrot feathers, and so forth were traded over many thousands of miles. And there was extensive trade in the Americas, which was really quite extraordinary. But these masks were famous for their mosaic work, which was extraordinarily skilled. And here below on the doorway, the other doorway, you see agricultural implements. So Federico was referencing the beginning of organized agriculture in the Americas. Aha. So now, above Chichen Itza, we have our Aztec emperor. Now, you may know that the Aztecs, Moctezuma II, was the emperor of the Mexica, and we call them Aztecs. And Mexica, of course, translates to Mexico in modern times. And this is Federico using his imagination to see how Moctezuma II might have looked with his quetzal feather headdresses and his gold jewelry, very elaborate, with sumptuous dress. Below him is a jaguar warrior, an Aztec jaguar warrior, and to the right is La Malinche, who is the translator, was the translator of Cortes, Hernan Cortes. And here she is shown in a codex, post-conquest, and she is next to Cortes, talking to one of the tribal leaders. And without her, Cortes would have gotten nowhere because she made it possible to do the negotiations. And sometimes she's maligned as the consort of Cortes. She had his children, but more importantly, she was the key to what happened later upon Spanish arrival. Okay, and here's our jaguar warrior. I thought I'd just show you the jaguar warrior from the books of the Aztec. And this one, yeah, he's nicely grabbing his hair, and grabbing hair is a sign of conquest in many cultures, and they wear, or they hold, these extraordinarily complex shields. And here is the jaguar warrior with his club, and this is lined with obsidian, so not a nice weapon to encounter. And this is a prisoner. He's tied, so you can assume what happens. By the end, he's not going to succeed. But I might add about Aztec ritual warfare that they actually went onto the field and they captured prisoners. They didn't kill people on the field, which is diametrically opposed to what the Spanish did. They took them home and then they sacrificed them. So it was a different way of approaching conflict and warfare. Now, Diego Rivera painted this in 1945 in Mexico City, and I guess many of you have been there and seen the murals. And I believe Federico studied with the students of Diego Rivera. So I just wanted to show you how this was depicted back then when there was this outpouring of pride in the pre-Hispanic culture of Mexico. And we see the market of Tlatelolco in front, and the market was extraordinary. It was just full of exotic goods, and Cortez and his men went in and they were absolutely astonished at what they saw. And we have a ruler here and La Malinche here, and in the distance we have Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital itself. And here is a map just to situate you. Here is Tenochtitlan right in the middle of the Valley of Mexico, and that is, of course, the same as Mexico City today. And the entire Aztec Empire, well, this is the close-in area, but these are tributary states and allied states. And one of the reasons that Cortez was able to overcome this incredible imperial this empire was because the Tlaxcalans and others weren't really fond of their Mexica overlords, and they allied with Hernan Cortez to wage war. And here you have an example of Diego Rivera, detail of an Aztec eagle warrior with Cortez. You know, and he has, many of you have probably read Guns, Germs, and Steel. So here you have the steel, and you have, well, the horse, who is very important also in this warfare. And then the eagle warrior, who was more of a ritual warrior wielding his obsidian club, which wasn't entirely effective against an armored man. But really, most of the depopulation of the area and the lack of, shall we say, organization to oppose Cortez occurred because of disease. Everyone got smallpox, and about 80% of the population may have died of various diseases. We don't know exactly, but it decimated or destroyed many of the populations and left them disorganized. Okay, so here you can see that La Malinche holds Hernan Cortez's name, 1485, and then we move, these columns actually mark the quarter divisions of the Torreon. And she leads us into the next area. Oops. And this, I just wanted to show you, this is actually Cortez's map of the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan that he drew from his memory in 1524, and he sent these letters back to the crown. And the extraordinary thing about Mexico City, you know, it's sinking today, because it is basically built on an island in a lake. And the Aztec, the Mexica, wandered from the north somewhere, you know, maybe around here, who knows, from the Chihuahuan Desert south, and around 1325, they had a sign from their god that they should establish their city on this island in the middle of the lake. And they made it into one of the greatest cities in the world. Also, maybe it had 200,000 people at the time. We don't, it's hard to judge population, but they were all crammed into this urban area in a very organized way. Again, a grid divided into 4 parts, organized according to the directions, and also with causeways that led to the outside. So here we have a reconstruction or imagination of what Tenochtitlan looked like in the central plaza. We have the twin pyramid of the gods Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli, the water god and the war god, and various temples and people doing various things with the canals around them. So, of course, if you go outside that way, I hope you can guess what we have here. The architect modeled this on the double pyramid, the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan, and this is from a sister city. And here's another imagined reconstruction of the Plaza Mayor in Tenochtitlan, with some people gathered around. But this was an enormous structure. And when Cortez went into the city, he was so astonished when he wrote his letter back to the crown. He said he had never seen anything like this. The organization and the beauty and the cleanliness. It was much cleaner than Spanish cities, too, at the time. This was an extraordinary place. And many times I think, oh, what would it be like to go back in time and be one of the first people to walk in there and see what this civilization looked like before it was destroyed? Now, one thing that we see in that plaza that Federico painted is Coatlicue. She is a goddess, serpent skirt, and she dates to about 1495. She's Aztec, and here she is in stone. You can see her in the National Museum. But she stood in the Plaza Mayor, and here she is in all her glory. If you want to get into the details, she is actually two snakes, again, their heads facing one another. Some belief is that she's been decapitated, and this is blood coming out, and she seems to lack her forearms. She has snake shoulders. She has serpent skirt, and that is her name, Coatlicue. She has talons, and of course this lovely necklace, which consists of hands and hearts. Let's not make that one. And a skull in the middle. And these are all rattlesnakes of a particular species. So what does she represent? She represents birth and death. She's a goddess who is incredibly formidable in her powers of destruction, but also of creation. So this is the most important takeaway from this lady, who is enormous. And if you go into the museum today, she leans towards you, and it's very intimidating. And she stood possibly around there. And there may have been more statues of goddesses of this ilk in this plaza. We don't know. But they keep discovering new sculptures. Now, she was actually discovered, I believe, in 1790. And she scared everyone so much who discovered that they reburied her. Because she is, in person, even more imposing than she is here, because she represented so many destructive and positive forces at the same time. Okay, and if you go to Mexico City today, of course, this is the Plaza Mayor. This is where the double pyramid temple was, right here in this area. You can see it, and it was leveled. The stones were used to build the cathedral. But we're just standing right on top of what existed previously. And this temple here also represented Coatepec, or the Snake Mountain. So we have our snake theme developing along with everything else. Now, why did the Mexica establish their capital in this not such great island in the middle of a lake, probably? Well, the myth goes that they had their god, Huitzilopochtli, said there will be a sign when the eagle lands on a nopal cactus. And this is exactly shown here. It's a little eroded, but there's the eagle landing on the cactus, the prickly pear. And here it is in the Codex Mendoza. And you can see the city divided into 4 calpulis, or areas. And here's conquest taking place at the bottom with the shields and the clubs. And these are the various tlatoani, or speakers of the individual groups, who had to talk to one another and organize a very sophisticated government and system to feed and take care of 200,000 people. Because they grew from just a small city in 1325 to this large imperial empire by the time of conquest. And so we take the eagle on a cactus, often shown with a snake in its beak. And here is, very nice prickly pear. Prickly pear was representing the heart in Aztec symbolism. And here with a rather imposing snake, I might add, a really quite scary one. And eagles do eat snakes, in fact. It is a reality. It's one of those things that they are capable of. And of course, here's the Mexican flag, and the central design on that flag is of the eagle on the cactus with the snake. Okay, and just another thing that Federico included, he went down to the Andes for motifs. And here we are, this is South America, this is the Andean realm, the Andes Mountains. And he showed us another solar deity. And this is what is called a staff god or solar deity that comes from a site that is now in what is Bolivia. And this is an extraordinary representation of the gate of the sun in Tiwanaku, Bolivia. Has anybody been there? No? It's not so easy to get to. And the site has not been restored as extensively, but the Tiwanaku culture had extraordinary stonework, probably some of the finest stonework in the world that I've ever seen. And the Inca actually took people from Tiwanaku to build their stonework in the capital at Cusco. So this is a pre-Inca symbol of this god who is a solar deity. And this is not in its original space, but these would be aligned, so you might see a sunrise at the equinox and so forth. So I assume that's why Federico chose it. And here's just a drawing of this individual, or this deity, who has solar rays emerging from the head, just in case you didn't get it. And he or she has not staffs, so it's often been told, but actually an atlatl and arrows. And the arrows have eagle beaks, eagle heads on them. And this deity, this solar deity, stands on top of a pyramid, a stepped pyramid, which is half of what we call the Andean cross. And we see that right here. And this symbol you see here in petroglyphs. So even though they call it the Andean cross, it's obviously something that has spread across the Americas, and here represents some of the South American aspects of the imagery, and here that solar deity from Tiwanaku. Okay. So below the Andean cross is a basket of potatoes, and I think probably all of you know that potatoes are a New World food. And this is my own shot of some various potatoes in the market in Bolivia and La Paz. And as you may know, if you go there are a lot of different species of potatoes, and they taste really good, better than what you get here at McDonald. So I recommend these various foods. Now, Federico also wanted to show what was the civilization built on besides corn. So we have potatoes in the Andes. We also have beans, squash, tomatoes, and peanuts and cacao. Chocolate is something that we have from this area, really. And this is how cacao pods actually look when they're growing on a tree. And the Maya used cacao as a luxury good. I guess it's still sort of a luxury good if you buy really good chocolate. But they took the beans out, and they were actually used as a sort of currency by the time of the Aztec Empire. This is a moche pot from Peru, which depicts a squash, a gourd. And peanuts are an extraordinary sort of discovery of a cultivar in South America. This is a moche necklace of peanuts. And think how valuable they thought they were. They had enormous caloric value for people in the 500s and 600s AD. And so this was a ruler who was buried with a peanut necklace, and the gold is the sun, or the solar aspect of it, and the silver, the moon. So we have this duality and this valuing of these foodstuffs. And Federico has shown us what it's all built on. So moving opposite, to the opposite side, I thought I'd also add some Middle Eastern influence, which I walked past this lion and thought, oh, I've seen him before. And what Federico was looking at was the Alhambra and Cordoba, and two of the wise men from Cordoba, Maimonides and Averroes. And Maimonides is, of course, the famous Jewish scholar who wrote The Guide to the Perplexed. Here's an astrolabe, which represents the primacy and the extraordinary accomplishments of Islamic science at that time and math. And Averroes, who was a philosopher who was born at the same era. Now, below them are two lions, and the lions come from the Alhambra, from the lion fountain. The lions represent the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is the time of many cultures, many religions living in harmony in Spain, obviously before the Inquisition, which is probably why everyone came here in the first place. And these lions, as seen here, lions are not native to Spain, but this one I used to walk past every day in the Semitic Museum at Harvard, bears a great similarity to the Alhambra lions, and this is an Assyrian lion from the Ishtar temple in the north of Mesopotamia. So those are both northern Mesopotamian lions, this one dating maybe 1100 BC, and this one 800 BC. And they made their way as symbols to the Alhambra in the 1100s, and then to us. And Federico also references seafaring, beginning with the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians not only were the greatest seafarers, or amongst the greatest seafarers in the ancient world, but they also had the alphabet, and the alphabet that we use today. Now, this wonderful boat is also taken, in a sense, from Mesopotamia. Go ahead. This is also an Assyrian relief. And here are the Phoenicians with a horse head boat, just like we see with this other end of it. And they're paddling their way in the seas, again, with a wonderful snake and various marine life. So this image, these motifs, make their way through our consciousness and into what exists today here, this wonderful mixing, this wonderful world of different influences, not only through agriculture and religion, but through art. We have all these motifs that come together and create what we have here today in the Torreon. And this is really an extraordinary accomplishment to have it all put into one document, as it were. And this is a historical document to me, which shows not only the accomplishments, but the transmission of imagery through the ages from 14,000 BC to today. So, thank you very much. We can end up on there. Do we have time for questions? Okay, we might have time for a question or two.
In the pyramids, did they have tombs inside like in Egypt?
Yeah, well, yes, actually in Teotihuacan, we have burials inside. And they didn't know that, though, 20 years ago. And in fact, in graduate school, I was told, no, the Americas had pyramids, but they didn't have tombs inside. But now they have discovered tombs in most places. The tombs that are most famous are the Maya ones, like the tomb of Pakal at Palenque. But some pyramids don't have tombs or weren't rulers' tombs. So they had different uses, so it's complex. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah?
In your slide of the church in Mexico City, was there an area there that they preserved so that you could see what it looked like, or did they build on everything?
It was a little hard to see because it was taken when it was still very smoggy, or I don't know, maybe it's smoggier now. But yes, they've been excavating. When they excavate for the subway or for sewer lines and things like that, they keep finding things. And they exposed the Templo Mayor, just the bottom of it, because the stones were removed and taken to use for the cathedral. But you can see the bottom of it. I didn't show a picture of it, but I made my children go and
But I remember that part.
yeah. So you can see the snakes as they go up, and then it's sort of roughly cut off where they removed it. So, and the Cortez and his men pretty much destroyed the city and laid waste to it. And
It's hard to imagine a man that admired that culture so much to destroy it. What happened? The gold was overwhelming to him, I guess.
yeah, well, it was all about the gold, and then it was about, converting the natives, and they believed they had a better system. But they didn't think they could get their fealty except by destroying everything and destroying the idols. And unfortunately, all the books and the religion, perhaps archaeologists wouldn't have jobs today if we knew exactly what was happening. Thank you. Any other? Yes?
What type of paint is used for this mural?
Let's ask the artist.
They're inorganic pigments. They have to be inorganic. If you use organic, any flowers or blood, the lime, slate lime, eat it. So inorganic pigments. There are some synthetics.
So Federico and some of his assistants can speak to the complexity and the difficult aspects of actually making the fresco itself. I wasn't there for that, but I think physically it was very difficult, and getting the right colors and paints and doing it while it was wet, that's an extraordinary physical feat, quite apart from getting all of this imagery right and using your imagination too, and fitting it all in. Yes.
What is the inspiration for the combination of all these things into this mural?
Well, I think, again, this is the question for the artist, but if I may, I think he wanted to represent all those influences that make us what we are today. Is that not correct? And I think Federico also wanted to emphasize the positive aspects of transmission, of agriculture, of ideas, of religion, of art, and how we are all mixed. No one is pure anything. We all we're melded from many cultures. Mundos de Mestizaje, right? And perhaps you'd like to add to that?
Good enough.
Well, you told me. Any other questions? I would suggest you go there and take another look. And there's much more to it, and I think people are discussing other aspects of the fresco. I just talked about very few images here. There's much more. Thank you very much. Oh.